The Fellowship of the Great Physician welcomes you to House Call. Our hosts today are doctors of chiropractic, Dr. Gerald Lala and Dr. Richard Jensen, who is also a board-certified acupuncturist, practice independently in North Oaks, Minnesota. Let's join our hosts for today's program that will assist you in your quest for optimum health and well-being.
Welcome to House Call. I'm Dr. Gerald Lala.
I'm Dr. Richard Jensen.
It's wonderful to have you with us on this dimension of House Call. As the screen says, Miracle Weight Loss Part 2. And if you missed Part 1, we're going to do a very, very fast review of what we discussed in great detail in Part 1. And if you want the script that we use through the entire two-part series, you can call, and we're more than happy to sell it, or to send it to you. There's no charge for it. So we want to begin with some questions. Do you want to lose weight? You can if you want to. Have you tried weight loss programs? I suppose almost everybody has. Have you lost weight and regained it? I suppose almost everybody has. Would you like to lose weight? Or how about, could we say, would you like to maintain the weight that you have? Here are some natural solutions. So what are some of the benefits of weight loss? These are quite common, very understanding. You can extend your life. You can prevent adult onset diabetes, which carries a risk of shortening your lifespan expectancy by an average of 9 years. Or why do you want to live to an old age and be sick and in a nursing home? It doesn't make sense. And then childhood onset obesity carries a risk of shortening your life expectancy by an average of 16 years. Of course, there are a lot of options to losing weight, such as drugs or appetite suppressants, starvation or forced diets, low fat, high protein, low carb, and of course, gastric bisection. Calories do count, but we don't emphasize counting them whatsoever in this program. Of course, carbohydrates carry 4 grams per calorie, protein 4 grams per calorie, and fats 4 grams per calorie. Now, let's talk about some of these weight loss programs. Count calories and meal replacement exercise, tedious, and ultimately they give up. Calorie restriction, that's a bummer, is an anti-aging strategy. It's good, but it's tough to follow, of reducing the calorie intake by as much as 30% in an attempt to reduce aging. We have a real interesting natural way to do it, and there's nothing you have to buy to do it either. And then, of course, the CRAN approach, which is calorie restriction combined with adequate nutritional support. Most of the weight loss programs will say, well, you need to buy our multiple vitamin or this amino acid or something like that. But again, we have not found any that do blood testing to see what vitamins and minerals your body needs and doesn't need. How about the low-carb approach? That's eating a low-carb food, replacing those sugars with sugar alcohol, such as sorbitol, mannitol. You see them all listed there. What are carbohydrates? That's important. They're macronutrients. See, it's an M-A-C-R-O, meaning large nutrients as opposed to micronutrients. They're chains of glucose sugars that are hooked together. They're a source of energy. What about sugar alcohols? They're always involved in low-carb diets. They're chemically modified alcohol molecules that act as artificial sweeteners. They replace sugar with alcohol esters. They are sweet, but add little to no carbohydrates, which is wonderful. How about the net carb diet? Fiber and sugar alcohols are substituted for sugar. The total grams of fiber then are subtracting, giving a net carb intake. Okay, next. Sugars are reduced in the low-carb diet if you're following it. Preferably, you're reducing also animal proteins, you're reducing saturated fats, and you're reducing bakery products. All right, bakery products are also reduced. Now, we're going to talk about AGEs. Those are advanced glycination end products. What are they? And we're going to talk about glycination. Glycination is the cross-linking of glucose or sugar with protein molecules. Lowering your carbohydrate intake decreases glycination. It decreases the damaging effects of oxidants. Those are the bad things in our environment. And thus, we do not negatively influence that desoxyribonucleic acid or the genetic nature of our cells. Now, what are some of the positive influences of a low-carb diet on DNA? Certainly it's a healthy lifestyle. Certainly it's low in animal fat and lowers the intake of trans fatty acids, which are bad. The diets are high generally in vegetable proteins, but when we take proteins in, we want low-carb proteins or dense proteins. Dense proteins. We're going to discuss that in much greater detail here. The diets are low in density in carbohydrates. They certainly encourage some form of exercise, and of course, what those diets, all of the diets don't do is they do not encourage finding out what your specific biogenic or good food to your body is and bad foods, nor do they suggest a blood analysis that checks your own individual vitamin and mineral levels. So now some of the negative influences on your DNA, certainly tobacco products, alcohol, lack of exercise, spinal inflexibility. As doctors of chiropractic, we certainly know that if your spine is the main power line of your body, and if there are problems in the spine, it's going to interfere with the proper nerve and blood supply coming from your brain down your spinal cord out to your organs. So it's going to adversely affect everything, including your metabolism of calories. Increased ingestion of refined carbohydrates, saturated fatty acids, trans fatty acids, animal proteins, drugs, even over-the-counter drugs, as well as hormones are going to adversely affect your health. And then we talked about a subject that Dr. Jensen spent considerable time on, which you see on the screen now is called glucogenesis. Gluco, the prefix there would mean sugar. Genesis would be generating, like the book of Genesis, the beginning. And they have adverse effects on glucogenesis is the burning of your sugars, the metabolizing of them, and a great deal of that goes on in your liver. Now, using fats for energy, what does that mean? In reducing your carbohydrate intake to safe levels, safe levels in your body, your body will use fats for energy, which predisposes you to weight loss. If following a low-carb diet correctly, not some radical stuff, people then find that not only are they reducing sugar, but of course they're reducing calories. Now, Dr. Jensen is going to take us right back to where he left off in part 2, and he's going to talk more specifically about low-carb, low-yeast. Dr. Jensen.
Thank you, Dr. Love. First, I want to correct one thing that we gave you earlier in our information, where we said the calories and how they count. Rather than carbohydrates being 4 grams per calorie, it's 4 calories per gram.
Thank you.
And it's 4 calories per gram of protein as well, and 8 calories per gram of fat. Now, actually, I'm used to 9 calories per gram of fat. Also, proteins, for you nutritionists out there or armchair nutritionists, proteins generally carry much higher calories per gram, such as 25, but because they take so much more digestive work to do that, it comes down to 4 net calories per gram once it's been digested. So then, let's start on our slide, low carb, low yeast. When we're looking at candidiasis, many people have unrecognized candidiasis, yeast or fungus infections, which often involves or is involved in irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, very often the intestinal tissue allows the yeast, fungus, and other organisms, as well as toxins and antigens, to enter the bloodstream, predisposing the individual to systemic infections. And those infections then come along with the symptoms of many times headaches, chronic back and joint problems, or allergies, those kind of things. When we look at it, candidiasis, yeast infections tend to drill into the mucosal layer of the intestines and therefore break their way into the immune system or break their way into the bloodstream. They also cause inflammation, such as for irritable bowel syndrome. You irritate something long enough, you'll get it mad at you. It'll start to inflame, and that creates holes, allowing food stuff in there as well. Being on a low-carb diet helps you from the point that these yeasts tend to eat the processed sugars, and those processed sugars then, if you're limiting those, you're limiting the kind of food that they eat, and therefore limiting their growth as well, or the strength of their community. So in a low-carb diet, it's largely free of bakery products and other foods that contain yeast as well. Therefore, many other yeast-related problems can clear up. Now, some of you people who are out there who are buying your vitamins from stores and things, it would be a prudent thing for you to do to be tested for candidiasis, particularly for use of B vitamins. Many B vitamins that are sold in stores are manufactured from yeasts, okay? So they're using yeast to manufacture those, and by taking those vitamins, you're actually can be indoctrinating or inoculating your system with yeast infections as well. Dr. Lala,
And
do you
then
have
many
something?
of the binders that they use to solidify the vitamin or the mineral are
Absolutely.
what?
Carbohydrate.
So many people on low carbohydrate diet are actually taking vitamins that are putting sugars into their body.
And they're thinking healthy, healthy,
Healthy,
healthy.
healthy, healthy.
Yep. And
So we're destroyed for a lack of knowledge.
right, right. So
And many times the chiropractors and nutritionists have not researched the information from the manufacturer to find out what those binding agents are and those fillers and
right, right. Not to mention that some of those fillers would then contain bleaches and things like
Right.
that. As well as there are products out there, B vitamins, that are available that have been manufactured by non-yeast byproducts, so that you can essentially get those vitamins and nutrients from non-yeast
or
sources.
non-carbohydrate binders or fillers.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't surprise us when people say, gee, you know, when I take my vitamins, I get hungry. How could that be?
Yes.
They're putting sugar in their body, and the body says, ooh, that's good. Now I'm hungry.
Right, and some people, when we talk about food sensitivities, a lot of times people are sensitive to carbohydrates as well. And depending on those sources of carbohydrates will actually increase the hunger that they have or the toxicity of their blood. The liver really plays a role in this, in that the liver tries to keep your blood in kind of a constant state. And so if your constant state is toxic, as you start to come off of these things that you're toxic to, or you just haven't been eating them, your liver says, hey, wait a minute, I need more of those toxins to bring you back into that state that you normally are in. And so having some knowledge in that part as to why, as to also those foods that you should not ingest, is great, great information for We Die for a Lack of Knowledge. And so it's great knowledge for you to help you through, say, that area. So in like 3-4 days of not ingesting this food, your pull towards eating it goes way down. Let's go into fiber. Fiber, there are two types. There's water soluble and non-water soluble. In the low carb program, you subtract the grams of fiber from the carbs, which gives you the actual number of carbs you're ingesting. And fiber is actually a great thing for helping to cleanse out the intestinal tract as well. And you want to look at having both types. The soluble fiber helps so that you have less of a release of sugar, so it brings out that duration a lot longer. And the non-soluble fiber helps to even scrub the side of the intestinal tract as you go through, adding to your health or your gastrointestinal health. Let's go to ketogenesis. Ketogenesis is a result of the body using stored fat rather than carbohydrates for energy. The thing is that we can end up with ketoacidosis, and so what we also want to do is look at how that is affected by the low-carb diet. In fact, you want to bring this about, but you want to monitor it, okay? Now, diabetics have ketoacidosis, which is a life-threatening complication of diabetes when it is out of control. So we always say, in order to manage something, you have to be able to measure it. And so many times in our management of these things, we want to take and we want to measure the acidity of a person. Okay, now we measure that acidity in 3 areas primarily. We measure that in your saliva, we measure that in your urine, but we also want to measure it systemically as well. And so since we don't go inside the body every time to do this, we're non-invasive practitioners, what we want to do is look at from your skin, because your skin is more of a indicator of systemically or where that acid goes into the body, your condition there. So we will actually take a reactive chemical and place it on the skin of the wrist and see that reaction will change the color for that chemical, and we can then take a look at that against a chart of colors and see what your systemic acid can be, and therefore begin to monitor that. Now, let's go for Dr. Lala.
Now we're going to talk about acidosis and alkalinity, and this is really important, and it's really good scientific information. Acidosis, alkalinity, what is pH? It's the potential energy of hydrogen ion concentration. Now, as acid pH decreases, acidity increases. As the pH increases, alkalinity increases. Now, typically, the pH in the mouth is between 6.0 and 7.0. In the stomach, it's 1.0 to 3.5. In the stomach, or in the proximal end, that's the end of the small intestine that hooks up to your stomach, it's between 3.5 and 7.0. The distal end of your small intestine, you can see the pH is going much more alkaline, and that's between 7.5 and 8.0. And interestingly, blood pH ranges between 7.3 and 7.5. Now, every food, when it's metabolized by the body, ends up with either an acid or an alkaline ash, and that's how we come up with acid and alkaline ashes. And so it is important then that we measure the internal pH of the body that Dr. Jensen was talking about, as well as what's going on in our mouth and what's going on in our system through urine, because then we can adjust that pH. For example, with me, even though I follow a low-carb diet, I am very careful to monitor that, because I don't want to be, I want to be acid when I eat, and then after I eat, a couple hours after I eat, the system turns alkaline, and then a couple hours to an hour before we eat again, it's supposed to turn acid. So the cycle goes on in the body at least 3 times a day, and many people who are having weight issues, either anorexia or bulimia or obesity, their pH, their internal pH is so out of whack. It's like being awake at 3 in the morning when you're supposed to be asleep. So that circadian cycle of the body is all out of whack, and that's why they can't lose weight or they can't sleep. The other thing that goes on in a lot of these diets, and many of them have very good things involved in them, they really do, but they'll recommend some kind of a multiple supplement, but that's good, but they generally do no blood scan of their body to see what their individual biochemical nature is. They do no hormone analysis. They do no protein analysis. They do no mineral analysis. They don't do any neurotransmitter analysis. So they may be taking a multiple vitamin, which is very good for them, but they're doing it blind. They're doing it blind. So if you walk blind, what's going to happen? You're going to stumble and fall. So now we're going to talk about, or Dr. Jensen is going to talk about alkaline-forming foods. Remember I said now when we metabolize a food, when the body burns a food, it ends up with an ash that's either alkaline or acid. And this is important in weight control or weight loss. So alkaline foods, Dr. Jensen?
Absolutely. Well, here we have alkaline-forming foods. It's important to note that when we're talking about alkaline-forming foods, we're looking at foods that actually, after digestion, the ash of the food is what determines whether it's alkaline or acid. So in this regard, we have figs, molasses, olives, lima beans, soybeans, apricots, greens. Greens, we're looking at turnips, beets, dandelions, mustard, those kind of things. Raisins, kale, almonds, parsnips, beets, dates, celery, rutabaga, endive, cantaloupe, lettuce, parsley, watercress, potatoes.
Which are nightshade plants.
I
haven't had a backache since I stopped eating potatoes.
So they create a lot of inflammation.
It's a poison to my body.
Sure.
So many people with rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, guess what? It's the potatoes.
So we're looking at potatoes, peppers.
Right, and interesting, the majority of those alkaline foods are high in sugar, high in glucose if you look at it.
Yes.
So they're taking the alkaline foods out of their diet, turning them into an acid metabolism.
Right, right. Pineapples, coconut, pomegranates, So we have those. There's also baked beans are acid forming, are alkaline forming, nectarines, cabbage, cherries, sauerkraut, grapefruit, tomatoes, radishes, currants, cauliflower, lemons. Interesting. Lemon is very acidic. We use its acidic content many times in cooking to help cook foods. You know, so you put some on meat and it'll actually start to oxidize, which is cooking. So they use lemons to do that. But after it's digested, lemons are alkaline, so they're an alkaline source in the body. Now I want to talk to you about this as well, because when we look at it in Oriental medicine, you look at yin and yang, and yin is more of the building up of tissue. And when we're making things more alkaline, what we're looking at is more potential hydrogen. pH is potential hydrogen. And that creates an area where we can create more energy in the body, and the body uses that energy, ATP, which is the currency of that energy, to build tissue. So actually, alkaline foods are not all that bad, but it's the high sugar content ones that are bad. So there's many choices in here for that. Okay, let's go on. String beans, peaches, mushrooms, squash, watermelon, grapes, buttermilk, whole milk, millet, Brazil nuts, buckwheat, onions, and green peas are all forms of alkaline-forming foods. Now, acid-forming foods, Dr. Lala?
We have a list in front of you there. You can go down through it quite quickly, but I want to draw your attention particularly to the last one on the bottom of the right-hand side of your screen, macaroni. That's high in carbs now, very high in carbs. And of course, when we're going to be eating ham or bacon, that's high in nitrates and nitrates. And if you look at the next slide, you see most grains, they're high in carbohydrate, but they're acid forming. That's why they'll go and use, if you buy a low-carb bread, they've taken the sugar and a lot of the carbohydrate out of it and put in there the converted alcohol esters. And of course, corn is very high, and all of your breads. Well, when you take that out, you're lowering your carbohydrate intake. Now, next slide, acid alkaline food cautions. You've got to be careful about your own individual biochemical sensitivities, and they can be checked out through blood testing. You're going to increase your immune activity. You're going to reduce inflammation. And then the next slide lists the type of food sensitivity testing that is, to our knowledge, the most effective, and that's called the combined IgE and IgG4 food testing. The IgE is for fixed food sensitivities, and the IgG4 is for delayed food sensitivities, and there's a pamphlet on your screen that we can send you if you like. Now, Dr. Jensen is going to spend some time talking about low glycemic and high glycemic foods, and this is very important to catch this now.
Okay, so low glycemic foods versus high glycemic foods. It's an indicator of how quickly carbohydrates are metabolized and absorbed into the blood, and we can see that from a point of if we have a lot of fiber, it lowers that glycemic index of the food, so that many times when they're measuring glycemic index, they relate it to either white sugar or white bread. You can have the two different distinctions of graphs from that regard, and it's how quickly the carbohydrates are put into the bloodstream means how much of an insulin factor that it goes up. So then it leads us to insulin resistance. The glycation of insulin molecules making insulin ineffective in its task for storing glucose in the cells. So insulin resistance, what we find is when we have too much sugar, it means that we have to release a lot more insulin. By releasing a lot more insulin, what that does is it makes that there's too much, so then the cells have to regulate that by bringing down the amount of binding factors to that so that it uses it less, makes us less sensitive, and therefore causes insulin insensitivity. So, nutrient-dense foods for Dr. Lala.
Thank you. Some of the nutrient-dense foods, we're going to go through those very quickly. Low-carbohydrate foods are nutrient-dense foods: alfalfa sprouts, avocado, beet greens, bell pepper, remember that's a nightshade, cabbage, celery, asparagus, bamboo shoots, bean sprouts, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrots, and celery. Some of the low-carb vegetables are chicory, collard greens, cucumber, eggplant, endive, escargot, garlic, kale, leek, lettuce, mung bean sprouts, mushrooms, mustard greens, okra, onion, radish, romaine, shallots, spaghetti squash, that's good, spinach, string beans, summer squash, Swiss chard, tomatoes, they're a little bit higher in carbohydrates, turnip greens, zucchini, and watercress. Now, some low carbohydrate fruits: apples, apricots, blackberry, blueberry, boysenberry. You see the whole list of them. There's a ton of them there, but you've got to be careful now. Even fruits that are low in carbohydrates demand the secretion of insulin from your pancreas for the body to metabolize them. So the less of these even dense carbohydrates that you put in your body, the easier it's going to be on your pancreas. Therefore, it's going to decrease the likelihood of adult onset diabetes, and or if you already have adult onset diabetes, it's going to reduce the difficulty of it, and you may totally heal up with it. If you're on insulin, you may not need that anymore either. So one of the primary goals of the low carbohydrate diet is to minimize as little insulin as possible from your pancreas, as we want to maximize we want to minimize pancreatic stress. Fruit juices are most commonly high in sugars and should be avoided. What do they say to have in the morning? Come and have a glass of orange juice. My God, you're just dumping sugar into you. I know there's vitamin C in there and some minerals and some other vitamins, but you're jerking your body right off to the wrong start right at the beginning of the day. So that's important. So why do so many people fail? They do not have adequate biochemical testing. Now, Dr. Jensen is going to talk a little bit about proteins.
Okay, well, the different proteins that we have are animal protein, and that contains poultry, beef, and pork. Those are the ones that we're probably the most familiar with. But then there's also vegetable sources of protein, and for those of you out there who are vegetarians, you're very well versed in that. And we're looking at elevating those types. Those are good proteins as well in the body. Also, seafood is great. In fact, I've met people who have been on low carbohydrate diet that when they haven't had success with it, they told them to go on seafood, and then they started to have much more weight loss.
Now, it doesn't matter what diet program you're thinking about. It's finding out your individual biochemical nature, finding out what vitamins and minerals or amino acids or homeopathic remedies your body has a sensitivity to or not. Now, carbonized foods and cancer and digestive problems and weight, obesity problems. When food is cooked with charcoal gas and the food is carbonized, the petrochemicals and the carbons in the charcoal gas are carcinogenic. So a person is far better off not eating foods that are cooked over direct flame from charcoal or gas. They're better off. When we cook on our grill, we use a plate on it, and so the meat does not become, and the vegetables do not become carbonized. And finishingly, what's the problem? What's the problem in weight loss? People do not know their individual biochemical nature. Everyone does have internal biochemical differences. We need to find those if we're going to be healthy and live a long life. And again, the more that you learn about your body from a scientific basis, not some of this junk that's floating around out on the internet and that they're pushing off in health food stores and stuff like that, you've got to learn who you are. You are different than me. And we all have different biochemical natures, just as much as psychological and spiritual natures. So look at yourself, find out, get some good diagnostic testing done.
The Fellowship of the Great Physician, through its School of Health and Healing, provides classes each Thursday evening. The primary focus of these classes is biblically based spiritual health and healing, with a brief teaching on physical health and healing. There is no charge or registration fee for these classes, but a free will offering is received. For further information on the School of Health and Healing, class time and location, or the topics discussed on today's program, contact us at the Fellowship of the Great Physician, in care of Dr. Lala or Dr. Jensen, at 200 Village Center Drive, Suite 100, North Oaks, Minnesota, 55127, or telephone us at 651-484-8521. Thank you for joining us today.